We'll be starting shortly. I'm just getting everything else set up real quick. And it just says, driving my home, said, Happy Freedom Friday, everybody. I want to say hello to the greater Bilby. I'm actually not feeling better today. I'm feeling a little bit worse, but the show must go on. I want to say hello to Nana Pam and also to Janine and Johnny from Jeep Things Outdoors. We'll be getting going here shortly. I'm just getting the rest of my settings all set up now. All right. And welcome, everybody, to Freedom Friday, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. But there are also some new people who have joined us. By new people, I mean people that have joined since I made the first welcome. So I want to welcome 49 Travelers, as well as Sam Finn and Ford Van Man. And yeah, there was, I decided to play a little bit of music there because of the fact that I wasn't quite ready yet. I had just rebooted my laptop, and it's not the quickest laptop in the world, but then again, I guess I can't really complain for a $300 laptop, so it is what it is. So we are live here for the next hour or so, give or take. I don't really have any plans, after this. I already had pretty much canceled a meeting that I had as far as part of my voluntary work because of the fact that I am under the weather. And so I didn't want to get anybody else sick. So I decided that, I could still do the Freedom Friday event. And I'm going to definitely do my best to be able to do this for a full hour, if not a little bit longer. We'll see how things go. But as Freedom Friday often goes, I like to pay tribute to our fellow military as well as to our first response soldiers that we have here in the our local cities and local towns. You know, we call them sheriffs, policemen, you know, firefighters, whatever. But they're local soldiers. That's really what they are. They're fighting for our safety and whatnot. So there was, I think this was last week that this came out, or maybe 2 weeks ago. But it kind of goes a little bit to heart because one of the Army Staff Sergeant members is actually local to my area, at least fairly local, about an hour and a half away. Staff Sergeant Brian Black, Staff Sergeant Jeremiah Johnson, and Staff Sergeant Dustin Wright died Wednesday, October 4th. So, I mean, it was a while ago, but I think it was only a couple of weeks ago that this information became public. Wednesday, October 4th in southwest Niger as a result of hostile fire while on a reconnaissance, there we go, a reconnaissance patrol. An ambush involving up to 50 fighters most likely affiliated with the Islamic State group. The incident is under investigation. All three were assigned to the Army's 3rd Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. For those who are not familiar with what a reconnaissance is, which, you know, it's something that I was not always familiar with, it's a military observation of a region to locate an enemy or ascertain strategic features. And I could probably go into more details, but I think it almost kind of speaks for itself. The idea is to observe the enemy because basically what's going on in Niger there's basically a lot of I'm sure I don't really have to explain all this, but there's a lot of evil going on in Niger. Such affiliated Islamic groups such as Al-Qaeda and other ones. I think it's actually in this report, but I just wanted to mention that real quick. I'm not actually looking at live chat at the moment, but I'm sure someone's already called it out. But Black, 35 years old, served as a Special Forces medical sergeant, also known as an 18D. The native of Puyallup, Washington, hence about 90 minutes away from me, enlisted in the Army in October 2009, according to a statement from U.S. Army Special Operations Command. Black earned the Ranger tab and Special Forces tab while in the Army. During an interview, his sister-in-law tearfully, yet I imagine proudly, mentioned that he was a great father and husband. Johnson, 39, served as a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear specialist, also known as a 74D. He enlisted in the Army October 2007. He was from Springboro, Ohio. And Wright, 29, was a native of Lyons, Georgia. He served as a Special Forces Engineer Sergeant, or an 18C. He enlisted in the Army July 2012. Wright earned a Special Forces tab. 2 other U.S. service members were wounded in the attack in southwest Niger. U.S. forces are in Niger helping to train and advise Nigerian security forces. They are not serving in a combat role, according to officials at U.S. Africa Command. This country is also host to a small U.S. drone base that operates surveillance and intelligence drones. Here it is in the report. Niger is a hotbed of Islamic and insurgent groups, to include Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb? Is that how you say it? Maghreb? Or AQIM and Boko Haram. So that's that. I want to... Obviously, in mentioning these 3 gentlemen, I want to thank them for their services. And while it may not have been a combat role that they were playing, it's very clear to me that it was a combat role that took their lives, and unfairly, no doubt. but it's men like these three brave soldiers that give us the freedom that we have today. Um, it's never an easy thing to read. When I was reading some of the things that some of the neighbors in an interview were talking about when it comes to black, I nearly shed a tear. And I'm not necessarily a very expressively emotional guy, but it always brings a bit of awe and wonder to me that that some people, that so many people willfully knowing what the costs may be, including their own lives, and yet they still willingly step up to the plate and serve this country so bravely. And so, yeah. Going back to live chat here, Jeep Things Outdoors says, hope you had a happy Thanksgiving other than not feeling well. Well, I spent my Thanksgiving alone. I was warm, but I was alone, which, as I mentioned in my little announcement video, that doesn't necessarily, bother me. I'm not necessarily, I don't classify myself as an introvert, nor do I an extrovert, but, I was just fine being alone. I would have much rather seen my family. I always look forward to seeing my extended family, and while I can't necessarily eat most of the food that they provide, I could always bring my own dish, and a lot of the Filipino food, because I have a lot of Filipino relatives, they cook very vegetarian food at least, which is a reasonable compromise. But I always enjoy doing the Thanksgiving and the Christmas prayers. So I don't know what led the decision to me being the official prayer sayer, but ever since my grandfather passed away several years ago, who was traditionally the one to do the prayer in the family, I guess they chose me to do it, which I'm more than happy to do it. So, let's see here. Going back to live chat again. Let's see. I must have missed something because somebody said that's a shame, Janine. So I'm assuming that I missed something. I don't know. I can't see it now. But the Greater Bilby says, sorry you're feeling worse, so am I. Sneezing and coughing now. I haven't been doing a whole lot of sneezing, a lot of runny nose, so I've been blowing my nose a lot, a little bit of coughing, not too bad. Sam says, hope you feel better soon, and I appreciate that. And oh, I see. So Janine was saying that her internet is bad, so she can only listen. But better to be able to listen than not participate at all. Hello, Maggie, as well. Hello, happy weekend, everyone, and happy weekend to you as well, Maggie. And like I said before, I'm going to do my best to make it through the entire hour. And you never know, since I don't really have any plans, I'm able to make it longer than an hour. And let's see. I think that's pretty much it. Oh, Maggie says, it's a shame anyone has to lose their life. I feel for their families. Absolutely. And, it's the great tragedy for the great cost that our great country has. Freedom is never free, and that's I don't know if I could say that it never has been free before, because we don't know what humanity was like before the fall. Of course, the fall was with two individuals, but essentially the only restriction they had was not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and aside from that, everything else was free reign. So I don't know. Linda says, hope it's not the flu. No, I don't think it's the flu. And apparently Linda was also alone because all of her family has passed away, and I'm sorry to hear that. Then again, I don't know. I guess I don't really celebrate holidays all that much. Obviously, Thanksgiving's a little bit different because it's not a religious holiday per se, although it does have some religious context involved in it. And I'll explain why, what I mean by that as we go along. Driving My Home says, do you know any local to Tacoma who does solar installation? I do not. I believe in one of Jax's videos, Jax Austin. What's the name of that place that he goes to? It's some sort of solar place, and I think it's in Olympia though. I don't know of any places in Tacoma, but then again, I haven't really had a reason to go look because I was going to do my own installation. But I can probably get back to you on that though. Let's see, Greater Bilby says, you're going well so far, better than I could. Well, I appreciate that, Greater Bilby. I'm not sure if I could actually do better than anyone else, but I appreciate that nevertheless. And thank you, Maggie. Maggie says, hi, Garrett, glad you're here. Well, I'm glad that you're here as well. And I'm glad that everybody that's currently watching the live feed is currently here. I think we actually have 13 people supposedly watching right now. I could be wrong. I might just be 13 minutes. Let's see. Ford Vanman says, a city nomad is in Washington somewhere and can do solar. He has a job, but likely wouldn't turn down side work. And that's actually true. I didn't even think about that. I believe he's actually south of Olympia. What is that sound? I don't know if you heard that buzzing sound, but I sure heard it. I think he's in... I can't think of the name of the city. Anyway, yeah, so a city nomad is the one who... oh, yeah, he's in Portland, Oregon, that's right, which is actually not very far away from Olympia, if you think about it. Maybe an hour and a half drive. But yeah, he did, and the Greater Bilby is correct on this. He did Deborah Joy's solar install, and from the looks of it, he did a really good job. Oh, okay, so he works in Portland, Oregon, but he lives in Vancouver. Vancouver's what I was thinking of. I was thinking of Vancouver, which is pretty much like 15 minutes away from the border or something like that. It's been a long time since I've actually been to Vancouver, even though I've driven past it a couple of times now. See, Sam Finn asked, how long do you think it will take for you to get the bus the way you want it? Oh boy, that's a very open-ended question, especially considering that I spent a year and 10 months working on the van, and although I did it slowly, I have to say that I never finished it. It's pretty close, except for little ends that need to be finished up. A lot of doors need to be made, but the cabinets are almost done for the most part. And I will actually have more van build videos with the old van in it because it's owned by a friend of mine. So you'll still be able to look forward to that. As far as the bus, though, I have no idea. The goal after the winter time, which I may decide to work on it sooner than that, considering some of the challenges that I'm already facing with the bed. I thought it had a fairly decent temporary installation, I guess. It's been held by zip ties on it's complicated. I'll get into it on a video, but I don't think it's working, and it's unfortunate. So I need to figure something out. I'm guessing, depending on how long I spend, I mean, just on the ceiling alone, I've seen a lot of bus conversion videos. And in fact, I've seen a lot of them even before I ever decided I was going to buy a bus. Probably a year before I decided I wanted to buy a bus, because I wasn't considering even selling the van, so I had no reason to think about buying a bus. But I've seen a lot of bus conversion videos, and there's a certain technique on how to panel the ceiling that I have never seen somebody do. And I can't say that I'm making this method up, like it's something that I came up with exclusively, but I've never seen someone use this method, and I didn't use any other means to think of it, so it was all by my own way of thinking. It may be something that already exists, but so far as I know, it doesn't. So I think even just the ceiling alone might take a month to work on. I have no idea. I really don't have a frame of reference. All I know is that I bought far better quality tools, which I'm hoping will shorten the process to do even the simplest of things, like cutting one strip of wood. I'm sorry, I don't really have a better answer for you. Maggie says, I can't wait to buy a bus, and it's pretty cool. I mean, it doesn't get the greatest gas mileage, but it's not that much worse than the van got. Let's see here. Oh, Jeep Things Outdoor says, I always enjoy your humbleness. I wish I had more of that. You know, sometimes I have to remind myself of what I used to be like, and it helps remaining humble. I was not always the nicest person out there, and I can't say that, you know, I was yeah, I can kind of say that I used to be a jerk before before I repented of my old ways, and sometimes I still have a hard time repenting of my old ways. But nevertheless, I do appreciate the compliment, Cheap Things. I don't know. I guess it's just thinking of myself no better than anybody else. I don't know. Or maybe even thinking of myself worse than everybody else. Sometimes I wonder which one I do more of. Let's see. Jesse Stafford says, greetings. How are you doing tonight? Ford or Chevy chassis? Oh, as far as the bus, it's a Ford chassis, and I'm doing okay. I'm a little bit worse than I was feeling yesterday, but I mean, I can function. I get around and all that. Let's see. The Greater Bilby asks if I ever drink. I used to drink. I don't drink anymore. I found that I have an allergy to it. Believe it or not, I can have it as long as I cook out all of the alcohol. I can actually, you know, I cook wine in my my broccoli or something like that. It might sound kind of weird, but it's actually really good. But yeah, I'm allergic to alcohol, unfortunately. Or maybe it's fortunate. I don't know. Let's see. Let's go back to the addendum here, and let's see. Oh, the question I had on the title here for Freedom Friday is, what does Thanksgiving have to do with freedom? And I'm not sure how many of you have been taught the fairly traditional view or a traditional story of Thanksgiving. I know that for the longest time I used to be taught a certain way as far as how it's to be viewed, I guess you could say. I don't know. You know, with the Pilgrims, you know, they went from England in order to establish a new world for whatever reason, and they met some Indians who decided to help them because they were having a hard time in the winter, and they were starving, so the Indians saved them, and then they brutally killed all of the Indians, and that's basically the story of Thanksgiving, and that's why we celebrate to do all that. So I'm not sure how many of you actually kind of remember being taught that way. That's kind of how more or less I was taught, and yeah. But you know, as I've been going through the years, in fact, it's actually probably been over the last maybe 2 years that I've been really starting to dive into the actual truth of Thanksgiving, or at least trying to get to the truth according to the actual sources, rather than going through historians, which all seem to have a different answer. And I don't know about any of you, but when I'm trying to find, oh, my webcam's not working. When I'm trying to find some sort of answer, and I can't get any sort of any sort of repetition, you know, regarding truth, or at least regarding the story having some sort of uh, I don't know, agreeance. How about that? The stories don't ever seem to agree. You know, I've seen other things such as you know, and I'm part Native American, so this, you know, this kind of bothers me if it's true. But supposedly the true story of Thanksgiving is the genocide of over 1 million or over 100,000 or 100 million Native Americans, and you know that would bother me if that's true. So far, I've been reading William Bradford's journal that he wrote in the 1600s. It's very strenuous in a certain sense because I don't know about any of you, but I don't have the easiest time reading Old English, despite being forced to read William Shakespeare, even though we really don't have anything to back up whether his stuff is actually legitimate, except for I think maybe 4 manuscripts. I think we have 4 manuscripts or 40 or something like that. But let's see. Let's just go back to the live chat here for just a second here. Let's see. Jeep Thing says, my mother used to say that the original Thanksgiving was probably not much more than a 3-day drunken orgy. Wow. Okay. I have never heard that one. Yeah. Ford Van Man says, if I ever change rides again, I want a bus like yours. You know, I've been pretty happy with it so far. There's very few things actually become inconvenient. Mostly just finding parking in large city areas. Yeah. The Greater Bilby says, that journal must be interesting. Yes, hard with the S's looking like F's. Actually, that part's... I got a textual translation, not a translation, but it's basically rewritten, but it doesn't do any like spell checking. It's a digital copy. It does have the pictures of the original cursive that William Bradford used. Most of it, I mean, it's pretty legible, but it can be difficult. I see the Greater Bilby says, I heard the Pilgrims gate crush the Native Americans gathering. Actually, from what I've read so far, and I haven't gone through the entire thing, unfortunately. I've been scanning through, trying to get the bigger picture of the overall history. So I haven't gone through all the major all the little details, but from what I could read, there was actually no one around, except for maybe 5 or 6 Native Americans, when they finally got to Cape Cod, and I think most of that village actually died from disease, most likely smallpox. But basically, when William Bradford and his crew of like 40 people got to Cape Cod, they were for the most part by themselves. Although I guess there was a point where, we'll go into that a little bit. Let's go back to live chat because I'm missing a lot of stuff here. Let's see. Linda says, I feel that the Indians got the short end of the stick, so to speak, by the white man. It's sad. I agree with that. I don't, although from what I can read so far, the Pilgrims, they didn't call themselves Pilgrims, they called themselves Puritans, but that's not because of that, of them going to America, or the New World, as they called it. Actually, but although from reading William's journal, they actually understood the continent to actually be called America. So it's interesting. It kind of really makes me have to revisit everything that I've been taught, although I don't really remember much of it in school, but and probably because I wasn't much into history back then, but it makes me question everything that I've learned, because apparently William Bradford knew that continent was called America. So I don't know. That's the way it's written. It's the way in his manuscript it's written. So I don't know. I'm having to scratch my head on that. Let's see. Jesse asked if I'm going to the RTR this year. Well, technically next year. I'm thinking about it. I'm hoping to. It all depends on whether or not it depends on what my workload looks like at work, because I don't want to leave them short-staffed. I mean, I know they have plenty of people they have plenty of people in the wood shop versus the pre-finish section that I work at, so they could easily have someone kind of take my place, but it's not easy to take my place. And I don't say that to be prideful, but I say that because, I mean, my brother could probably do it, but I know last time he did it, he kind of got stressed out a little bit. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I'm hoping to go. I just don't want. I'm a worker guy, so I'm all about what's best for the company. So I don't know. It's kind of weird. It is a short bus, by the way. It's about 21 feet 4 inches long from bumper to bumper, if I remember correctly, something like that. Let's see here. Linda asks, why did they use the letter F for S? And I have seen them use the letter S in other words. Well, from my understanding, it's just the way that it was. And actually, the letter F was for S. There was a couple others, like V was for something else. I can't remember what now. I don't remember. That's just how they wrote back then. I don't have an exact reason other than to try to better specify. That's why we have it the way that it is now. I should look into it, though, because I haven't really even thought about it. The Greater Bilby asks, how busy am I? Let's see. Well, to give you an idea, we have 10 people working in the wood shop area, building all the cabinets and everything else, where there's between 3 and 4 of us in the pre-finish area. Which seems to be a pretty good overall ratio. But sometimes I think that it might take another person or two in the wood shop in order to actually keep up, I guess. I don't know. I haven't really put too much into it. I do know that right now we're looking to have a slow couple of days if we're not careful, and that kind of I'm thinking I wouldn't mind some slow days, because a lot of times we're just doing one job after the other, like just busier than the bee, which is what I love. I love that, but sometimes I wouldn't mind having a break, but I just wish it would happen in January for obvious reason. Let's see here. Linda asks, didn't the Puritans leave England to escape religious persecution? Yes, they did. In fact, I actually copied some sections of the manuscript I was reading, just to give you an idea of that, because I've heard historians actually talk about how it was not religious persecution that the Puritans left because of, but it was religious monarchy that they wanted to set up, and I just don't see the evidence for the latter. Let me see here. I've got it in here. Let's see. So this is actually in the first chapter of William Bradford's journal. And I hope it makes sense. I think it makes sense, but it's a little bit long. Hope you don't mind, but it goes something like this. The one side labored to have the right worship of God and discipline of Christ established in the church, according to the simplicity of the gospel, without the mixture of men's inventions, and to have and to be ruled by the laws of God's word, dispensed in the offices and by those officers of pastors, teachers, and elders, according to the Scriptures. The other party, though, under many colors and pretenses, endeavored to have the episcopal dignity after the popish manner, with their large power and jurisdiction still retained, with all those courts, canons, and ceremonies, together with all such livings, revenues, and subordinate officers, with other such means as formerly upheld their anti-Christian greatness and enabled them with lordly and tyrannous power to persecute the poor servants of God. This contention was so great as neither the honor of God, the common persecution, nor the mediation of Mr. Calvin. That's the translation of their Bible, in case you didn't know, of Mr. Calvin and other worthies of the Lord in those places, could prevail with those thus episcopally minded, but the proceeding by all means to disturb the peace of this poor persecuted church, even so far as to charge very unjustly and ungodly, yet prelate-like, some of their chief opposers with rebellion and high treason against the emperor and other such crimes. And this contention died not with Queen Mary, nor was left beyond the seas, but at her death these people returning into England under gracious Queen Elizabeth, and that's a whole other story, many of them being preferred to bishoprics and other promotions according to their aims and desires, that inveterate hatred against the holy discipline of Christ and his church had continued to this day. That's a mouthful to try to translate into modern English. So just based on that alone, it shows, and actually there's a lot more involved with it. I just saved that because I could kind of sum that up a little bit easier than some of the other details. But it goes into the confirmation of King James the First and all that, and how he actually made matters worse. And so they fled to Holland. They didn't actually flee to America first, the New World. They fled to Holland because they already had religious liberty in that respect, that everybody could practice and worship as they so chose. But there's a lot of detail into that particular persecution. There we go. There's the word. Sorry, again, I'm not feeling well, so please bear with me here. But there's another. There is one more section I did copy down because it actually gave to because I didn't learn in school that the Puritans first fled to Holland. I wanted to make sure that was true too, and that was made very clear right before the second chapter. Or maybe it was right before the third chapter. I can't remember now. It goes something like this. Yet seeing themselves thus molested, and that there was no hope of their continuance there, by that I mean England, by the joint consent they resolved to go into the Low Countries, where they heard was freedom of religion for all men, as also how sundry from London and other parts of the land, and had been exiled and persecuted for the same cause, and were gone thither. I can't remember what thither means, but there you go. And lived at Amsterdam and in other places of the land. So after they had continued together about a year, and kept their meetings every Sabbath in one place or another, exercising the worship of God amongst themselves, notwithstanding all the diligence and malice of their adversaries. They sing they could no longer continue in that condition. They resolved to get over into Holland as they could, which was in the year of 1607 and 1608. In fact, there's quite an interesting story, quite uplifting, actually. I'll go into that in just a moment. I want to first get back to the live chat because of the fact that I'm going to run behind if I don't. And yeah, I'm going to insert another ad there. But another, there's this story has actually something to do with their travel to Holland, which I've never heard anybody talk about. So I'm looking forward to actually getting that to you. Oh, Jeep Thing says, don't forget the like button, everyone. I appreciate that. Thank you. I don't know if there's 17 watching now, if there's actually more than that, but let's take a look. We've been on for 42 minutes already. 16. And that's okay. The average view duration is 10 minutes and 32 seconds. See, Maggie says, I think in schools we learn a very slanted look at history. I unfortunately agree with you. In fact, when we get into another portion of this Puritan story, we'll learn a little lesson on how history has not seemed to be learned from, but to be repeated. Because we as a country, at least in small sections, yet they are the popular sections of our free nation. They choose certain mistakes that have been made in the past, and it's all because we haven't learned from them. Or maybe they think they can do this same sort of thing, but the right way. Although I have never heard of a country doing it the right way. The Greater Bilby asked, so they were in Holland for about a year? No, actually, they were gathering for a year in the London area and gathering their troops, if you will, from a military term. But no, they were just gathering the amount of people that could afford to go to Holland. They actually spent 12 years, either 11 or 12 years. Most of the journal that I've read so far says the 12th year. So they spent at least 11 years and were pursuing the 12th year in Holland. And but going back to that story here, because actually before we do that, Jeep Things Outdoors says, I have respect for all religions and belief systems as long as they put forth a positive message. And yeah, I have respect for not the religions themselves, because let's face it, religions divide. But for the people who want to pursue a better life, if you will, even more so if they recognize that we do in fact have a creator. Ford Van Man says, we learned what they wanted us to know. Shame it's worse these days. And unfortunately, you're very correct. And that is a shame. The things I've actually, and I didn't, I heard about this, I think a couple of weeks ago. I was listening to my typical talk radio. You know, because I'm that entertaining of a guy that I like to listen to talk radio while I work. And there was a caller. She was either 12 or 13. She was really young. And she made mention that her class, in fact, her entire, I guess she just started high school or something like that. She was just starting high school. So I think she was 14. No, middle school. She was 13. Anyway, age is irrelevant right here, except for the fact that she was in middle school. And throughout her entire 2 years in middle school, so thus far, they had not learned American history, but they learned about Muslim history for both years. And I think to myself, what the heck is going on with this country? Thankfully, there was another teenager that called in and said that they were actually learning the U.S. history. But still, I mean, I think this was someone in one of the East Coast states, or the liberal states, I'll say, and one of the blue states. There we go. And not to hear or know the United States history. It's just, it actually kind of angered me. I am not one to get angered very easily, but man, to hear that was just appalling. Don't get me wrong, when I was 13 and 14 years old, I didn't even care about history. And I was told that later on in life, I would actually appreciate history a lot more. And I'm thinking to myself, this stuff is boring. I don't care about the dates. I don't care about the events. I just want to have fun. And man, I can only imagine what were people like when they were 13 or 14 years old back then. Were they thinking about just having fun? Because I imagine that half of the people back in the 1800s or even the 1600s, when they're 13 or 14, they're pretty much considered as men, and they're being held accountable. There is no fun except for making your household as safe and flourishing as far as food goes, and then of course you can have your playtime too on your day of rest and whatnot. But there isn't this running around in the streets and playing laser tag or anything like that. So I'm thinking to myself, man, if only I knew back then what I know now. But then again, how much more do I know now than I did back then? Sometimes I wonder if I actually knew more than I know now. And that I have to actually do all this research to try to relearn what I was actually taught. So it's kind of hard to say. Let's see, going back to live chat here. Yep, really sad. I went to a school board meeting where we were trying to get a book out of the high school where there were 3 pages of the Muslim faith and 1 or 2 of Judaism or Christianity. Yeah, that's where this country is going, to minority lands. The Greater Bilby says the genocide of the Australia's first people has only come to light more fully in the last 5 or so years. The more I read, the more horrified I am. The more I read, the more horrified I am as I learn about it. I don't know anything about it, but I imagine it's probably not much different than some of the challenges that we have faced here in America. As I have come to agree, history tends to repeat itself. It doesn't matter where you're from. The result seems always to be the same, just in different context. Maggie says the things have been so turned upside down lately. If they don't teach it, the people won't know they are repeating it. I've always loved history. I wish I did. I wish I did always love history. There's a lot of things I wish I would have loved that I do now, but thankfully it's not too late. Susan says, I am here late, but here's the thing, Susan. Here's the thing. You're still here. I'm better late than not at all. So thank you for joining us. Jeep Things Outdoors says, the countries that win wars write the history. The outnumbered don't get a say. That is actually not true, because we have far too many archaeological professionals that will actually go into the historical findings of these things. Say, for example, Babylon. We wouldn't know any bit of the history of certain aspects of Babylon. Say Nebuchadnezzar. The only history that we had, the only reference to Nebuchadnezzar that we had, was in the book of Daniel, and yet it wasn't until the 1600s, which is 2100 years after the fall of Babylon, that we discovered a manuscript that was referencing Nebuchadnezzar. It's not that those who win the war, it's not like, I mean, I don't disagree, because I think the majority of history is written by the winners of the wars. But I think there's almost always at least someone to mention their aspect of the war, assuming that it's caused by a war. 30 pages of Muslim faith. Wow. So it was actually 30 pages of Muslim faith that Nana meant, not 3 pages. So let me read that again, just so that way when people view this after this live feed, it will make a little bit more sense. Nana said, I went to a school board meeting where we were trying to get a book out of the high school where there were 30 pages of the Muslim faith and 1 or 2 for Judaism and Christianity. Now, you know the reason why they have only 1 or 2 pages for Judaism or Christianity? It's because Christianity is the problem with America. We are the enemies. Cosmic Country Girl says, have you ever listened to Michael Savage? He talks on many subjects, family, God, politics, and has written many books. You can find him live streaming if you care to listen. I've heard of him. I think I've actually listened to a couple of his sessions, but I'd have to familiarize myself to be able to give you a solid answer. And let's see here. Susan says, did you read something? Please reference it. I can give you the website that I got the document of the manuscript for my studying William Bradford, and that is right here in the live stream. It's one of the benefits of having a live stream is you get to see these links, whereas if you're not part of the live stream, you don't. I mean, I could put them in the description, but I don't. I don't know why. I just haven't so far. Maggie says, I always wished I could time travel in a bubble and see what life really was like from beginning to now. Yeah, I guess the only problem with that, Maggie, is if something happened to your time bubble and it for whatever reason broke, you wouldn't be able to get back if the technology wasn't there. I've been watching too much Star Trek. All right. Anyway, back to the story here. So that'll give you a copy of the manuscript of William Bradford. It's really not that difficult to read, except it's a lot of reading. Hello, Jesse. So going back to this, there was actually Bradford records a miraculous story of their ship potentially sinking if it had not been for divine intervention from God Himself. And this happened while they were sailing to Holland. And I don't have necessarily all the details. I want to say it was in chapter 4, but I could be wrong. Because I've only been reading it for the last few days. But at any rate, it's quite interesting because Bradford was having them they were crying out that there were leaks and they were trying to patch them, and at a certain point Bradford got the impression that the ship was beyond repair, and at that point they were just going to sink. So he started to pray, and there was prayer, much prayer going on, and somehow the ship was no longer sinking, and they were able to make it to Holland. It's something that I've never heard about in any historical comment about the Thanksgiving pilgrimage, or whatever you want to call it, the destination to the New World. But it's something I read. I'm like, whoa! I've never heard of that. I was quite surprised. And Jesse says, first time checking out your live stream. Well, I appreciate you checking it out. That's for certain. And you're always welcome to stick around as long as we're having this. I was not expecting it to take 56 minutes to get through only part of the truth about Thanksgiving, as far as I've gotten into it so far. But we're 56 minutes and 43 seconds in. 15 current viewers, and we're getting there. So that's something that I was quite surprised by, is reading that about what Jesse calls the power of prayer, and as I like to say, it's firing the winning shot. Now, these Puritans, I'm not sure if they called themselves Puritans at that point. I haven't studied that far yet. They were able to get by. I wouldn't even really say so much that they lived in and all this livelihood and whatnot, but from what how Bradford chooses his words, and again, I've been kind of skimming through it as well as I can in Old English. By the way, he so brilliantly lays out his words. And by the way, this entire journal of his is just filled with scripture. And it's very clear that these men and women were strong believers of the faith and strong practicers. It's very fascinating. I have never met someone who talks in such a way. I mean, it's as if, he was just spitting out scripture and as he's speaking, as if it's just, that's the way he talks all the time. And I'm thinking to myself, I have never met someone who does that. Like, I've met someone who applies, a conversation with a little bit of scripture here and there. And, I can do that too on occasion. But this, the way he does it is so incredible and so impressive. I think, if I can learn to speak like that without the Old English undertone, I think I might win something. I'm not sure what it is, but I might be onto something at that point. But they spent the better part of 12 years in Holland, where they got to, take advantage of, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but they got to take advantage of freedom of religion, being able to practice it however they best see fit, until there came a time when persecution really started happening in Holland too. In fact, there's a little portion here that I decided to put in here as well, and this is the last portion that I made reference of the actual what the actual journal. There we go. This is the last bit that I actually referenced from the journal, because this is the last bit that I've really had time to. I would have had more time if I wasn't sleeping so much, because I've been sick. Let's see. Going back to live streams real quick, before I read that, the 49er says, it's the first time I've listened to one of Garrett's live streams as well. Well done. Thank you, 49er. 49 Travels. What did I say before? 49ers? Well, 49 Travels. So, thank you. Let's see. Susan says, I grew up here. It was divine providence. Yes, it was. Let's see here. Driving my home says, can I ask you what side of the aisle you are on, politically speaking? I will say that I don't label myself as any particular thing, but I do lean toward independent constitutional conservatism. So that's where I base my views on. Because I think our country, just like anything really, requires a firm foundation, and we should not stray from such firm foundation because it profits us not to build a house along the river on sand, because it will just wash away. Linda said their faith had to be strong because I feel no one would have made it. Yeah, that might be very correct. Yeah, in fact, if thinking back on that journey to Holland, that sinking ship story, I'm thinking, if they didn't pray, would they have made it? I don't know. Let's see. Jesse says politics are a can of worms. Well, I don't know if I agree with that. I love talking about politics, obviously not on live streams or on YouTube because it can be divisive. But, as far as the political realm goes, the way that our Constitution was set up, it was to help help those who are in the realm of government to preserve and to protect our God-given freedoms. It was to give them a foundation that they can use to recognize that government is supposed to be limited, yet at the same time protective. And yet it's been, it's been a bit sundered from its original course. Anyway, I don't know if that makes any sense. Linda asks, are you running a fever? Do not take aspirin. Take Tylenol. I'm actually not running a fever, I don't think. No, I'm not. I just have a cold. It is what it is. Let's see. Going back to what I was referencing earlier, because I think I'm caught up with live chat. I made the reference that I included one more little snippet from the journal, and this was having to do with their time in Holland and how oppression all the way from England had journeyed down to Holland and all that. So it says right here, I want to say this is in chapter 6, but I could be wrong. There's a lot of chapters in that journal. They weren't mentioned as chapters, but they were labeled later as chapters. But anyway, for though there were many of them likely, yet they were not certain. It might be sundry of the things feared might never befall. Others, by provident care and the use of good means, might in a great measure be prevented, and all of them, through the help of God, by fortitude and patience, might either be borne or overcome. True it was that such attempts were not to be made and undertaken without good ground and reason, not rashly or lightly as many have done for curiosity or hope of gain. But their condition was not ordinary. Their ends were good and honorable, their calling lawful and urgent, and therefore they might expect the blessing of God in their proceedings. Yea, though they should lose their lives in this action, yet might they have comfort in the same, and their endeavors would be honorable. They lived here but as men in exile, and in a poor condition, and as great miseries might possibly befall them in this place. For the 12 years of truce were now out, and there was nothing but beating of drums and preparing for war. the events whereof all are all way uncertain. The Spaniard might prove as cruel as the savages of America. See, there's a reference of American here. And the famine and pestilence as sore here as there, and their liberty less to look out for remedy. After many other particular things answered and alleged on both sides, it was fully concluded by the major part to put this design in execution and prosecute it by the best means they could. In other words, this is basically where they came to the conclusion that they could no longer stay in Holland. But they wouldn't just go about blindly, I guess you could say. What happened was there was a group of pastors of certain little cities in Holland. I think they were pastors in cities. Anyway, they were pastors, and William Bradford, they got together with some other merchants and rich people in the area, and they were basically funded their way to the New World. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to afford to go. And they went in this beat-up old rackety ship. I guess you can call it a ship. It was more like a boat. It was actually, I think there were 3 of them to start out with, and eventually 2 of the 3 broke down over the storms and whatnot, and eventually all of them were able to transport in one, 40 in all, if I remember correctly. It might have been 42, 48, something like that. It was in the 40s. I haven't looked at the exact numbers, nor have I even tested to see if those numbers are correct, but I'm guessing somewhere in the 40s. But there's actually a lot of story involved in talking about the description of the storms and a lot of conversation that happened. There's even records of letters that were sent and received in order to make this whole business transaction to the New World take place. But it's mostly funded by merchants and whatnot, and this was, I guess you can call it a loan that would have to pay back with interest in one way, shape, or form. The way that they designed this whole new idea was based on the Bible itself. Obviously, they were very biblically well-read individuals. And I guess you could call this kind of a socialist type of world. Now, not to say that the Bible supports socialism, but they didn't call it socialism back then either. The whole idea is that everyone gets their fair share. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? Most countries follow this same principle. To give you a couple of examples out of the agreement that they wrote in July 1st of 1620, one aspect, one actually mentions this. There were basically 10 rules of thought. One of them says that all persons as are of this colony are to have their meat, drink, apparel, and all provisions out of the common stock and goods of the said colony. Sounds familiar. Sounds like modern-day California. We won't go there. Another example is this. Consider whereabout we are not giving alms, but furnishing a storehouse. No one shall be poorer than another. For 7 years, and if any be rich, none can be poor. At the least, we must not in such business cry, poor, poor, mercy, mercy. Charity has it life in work, in racks. I think it's racks, not in ventures. You are by this most in a hopeful pity of making. Therefore complain not before you have need. Uh, so yeah, this was design. I guess you could say this was the designing the one of one might consider a modern day social society. And when they actually got to Cape Cod, and and of course they were taught, by they did receive help from the Indians on how to farm crops and whatnot, but nevertheless, they tried out that whole socialist aspect, which again they did not call socialism. They didn't have a name for that. That's just what they had in Holland and some few parts of the world. Although most of them were just a monarchy where the king got everything and distributed whatever else he felt they deserved. But going back to the live chat here for just a moment. Let's see. Jesse says, build your house upon the rock, for castles made of sand wash away into the sea. Oh, it's kind of like what I was talking about before. Apparently, according to the Greater Bilby, I'm starting to look a little worse. I might be. I don't feel a little bit worse, but I might be looking a little worse. It happens a lot to me. Let's see. The country Cosmic Country Girl says, I do not believe women should be preachers like Joyce Myers. I tend to agree with you. Not to say that women could not be good preachers, but that's just not how things were ordained and how Paul wanted them to be, in my opinion. And actually, by the way, the scripture talks about it. But and I can't say that I like it. Can't say I don't like it, but it just is what it is. Let's see. Jeep Things Outdoors says, it just makes sense to me to look at issues instead of voting one way or the other across the board. Well, that's why this must be talking about here in America or elsewhere in the country or the world. I look at things, since I live in America, I look at things as in what's best for America, not what's Republican, what's Democratic, or what's just outright anarchy. Because if you take things to their end means, if you were to take the left to its furthest conclusion, you get nothing but monarchy. If you take things from the right to their absolute end solution, you get nothing but anarchy. The left believes in big government overall. The right believes in small government. So there has to be a middle ground, and everything has its boundaries. Boundaries are very important. And therefore, we need to recognize what those boundaries are. I think the Constitution is a pretty good example. It's not perfect. That's why we make amendments. But we have to have solid ground somewhere. And why not start there? Susan P. says, beautiful choices of reading. We are Americans, and we need to stand by our Constitution for religious freedom, all religions. My dad's family, 1700s to Pennsylvania from Holland and Germany. Hey, I agree. I mean, even if I don't agree with certain religions, people still have a right. God didn't stop Adam and Eve from eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, so why should we stop other religions unless they cause unnecessary harm, which I don't think most religions actually try to do, unless there's some sort of politics involved. See, Cosmic Country Girl says, I was raised Catholic and disagree with much of their teaching. I don't even want to go into that because I agree with you way too much on that. And let's see. Oh, my goodness. It's gotten way busier, and that's good. I like it. Let's see. Cosmic Country Girl asks, Garrett, do you go to a church or belong to one? I watch Charles Stanley in Touch Ministries because I'm home with my son who is autistic. That's a challenging thing to do. I'm sorry to hear about that with your son, but no one better than you to to be able to handle that. I guess you could say I'm church shopping in a sense. We're not obligated to attend a weekly church service or anything, which is nice. I can focus on what is true. But I will say that it's getting very difficult to find a first century focused church, especially since 90% of churches teach based on what is not necessarily truth-based, unfortunately. And it seems like it's just like, okay, you go to your service and then that's it. There's no community afterward or anything like that, and it makes it very frustrating. Hang on a second, I gotta plug my laptop in. Apparently I have 16 minutes left on my battery, so give me just a second here. All right, I'm back. And, I think I was a little bit of a buzzing sound here. But, sorry about that. I had to get a drink of water. I was feeling a little parched. And Susan, I read one of your comments while I was, refreshing my throat, and it's actually not social equity that helped form this country, but it was capitalism that eventually did. Um, Although I suppose not too many people would necessarily agree with that, but even according to Bradford's own journal, he had recognized over a period of time. I don't know how long it was, but clearly it was before the 7 years were up, that he noticed that having a storehouse, if you will, biblically speaking, wasn't working, because if everyone was getting an equal share, not everybody had to work as hard as other people in order to get that share. And that means that certain people were having to pick up the slack of others. And he's even talking about that a little bit in his journal. And so essentially what happened was they took that first agreement and they had to tear it up. And they formed a new agreement. And I don't have that in front of me, but essentially it was you get to prosper as much effort as you put into it. So basically the more that you make, the more that you keep. And that's actually what allowed for the Puritans to pay off their debt to those in Holland. And otherwise, what was happening was they were not able to pay back because there were people being sluggish in their ways. Let's see here. And that's actually more... Whoops. Didn't see that coming. Oh, this is an interesting live feed tonight. So anyway, let me fix this here. There we go. And a little to the right. There we go. So it was actually, and a lot of people, I was taught at least, that the concept of Thanksgiving was the reason why it was first done was to thank the Indians for helping them out of starvation, which in fact that wasn't the reason at all. According to William Bradford, the reason why they even held that event was to thank God for their prosperity. And that's and it wasn't even recognized as a holiday until many years after that. I was hoping to go into more detail. Maggie says, I can't see chat for some reason. You can try refreshing, Maggie. Yeah. So that's what I was taught, and only to come to find out that it was actually the feast was a thanksgiving to God. And one of the things that I appreciate as well is the proclamation that George Washington gave. Let me see if I can find that here. It's the Thanksgiving Proclamation. It's what actually made Thanksgiving an official United States holiday. And of course, this wasn't until much later. In fact, it was in October 3rd, 1789, that this proclamation took place. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read that to you, because I just think it's so brilliantly written. And it's not too terribly long. Whereas it is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits, and humbly to implore His protection and favor, and whereas both houses of Congress have by their joint committee requested me to recommend to the people of the United States a day of public thanksgiving and prayer to be observed by acknowledging with grateful hearts the many signal favors of Almighty God, especially by affording them an opportunity peaceably to establish a form of government for their safety and happiness. By the way, that's in reference to the Puritans. Excuse me. Now, therefore, I do recommend and assign Thursday, the 26th of November, next to be devoted by the people of these states to the service of that great and glorious being, who is the beneficent author of all the good that was, that is, or that will be, that we may then all unite in rendering unto him our sincere and humble thanks for his kind care and protection of the people of this country previous to their becoming a nation, for the signal and manifold mercies, for the signal and manifold mercies and the favorable interpositions of his providence, which we experienced in the course and conclusion of the late war. For the great degree of rational manner and in which we have been enabled to establish constitutions of government for our safety and happiness, and particularly the national one now lately instituted, for acquiring and diffusing useful knowledge, and in general for all the great and various favors which he hath been pleased to confer upon us. And also that we may then unite in most humbly offering our prayers and sufficiency and supplications, not sufficiency, our prayers and supplications to the great Lord and ruler of nations, and beseech him to pardon our national and other transgressions, to enable us all, whether in public or private stations, to perform our several and relative duties properly and punctually, to render our national government a blessing to all the people by constantly being a government of wise judge and constitutional laws discreetly and faithfully executed and obeyed, to protect and guide all sovereigns and nations, especially such as have sown kindness unto us, and to bless them with good government, peace, and concord, to promote the knowledge of practice of true religion and virtue, and the increase of science among them and us, and generally to grant upon all mankind such a degree of temporal prosperity as how about now? Okay, good. I was struggling there for a minute. Glad that is taken care of now. I wasn't sure, so I'm glad that somebody finally spoke up about it. But so even though it was, well over, goodness, 160 years later, it's nice to know that Thanksgiving is actually not celebrated because of the slaughter of Indians and whatnot, at least as far as the evidence that I can find. Like I said, I've heard many different renditions of Thanksgiving, but only one so far that I can hold to is one that I'm slowly diving into, and that one is the Journal of William Bradford. And it's well detailed enough, because any time that I've seen one that's like the genocide of 100 million Indians or whatever, which would bother the heck out of me because I'm part Native. Not that that should have anything to do with it, but I just find it, bothersome to, even with one death, let alone 100 million. But anytime I've ever seen a rendition of that story, it's not a very popular one. Even if it's the same story, it doesn't have very much, doesn't seem to be a lot of context. Things are always in little snippets. And I'd much rather see it for what it is. Just like if I were to see a quote from one of our Senate or our member of Congress that has said something about the savages or the Redskins or whatever they called them, I want to see the full context. I don't want to just see a small snippet and say, oh, they must have been racist. I want to see the whole thing. And that's what I would challenge anyone who wants to use an alternate story of Thanksgiving, which I don't even have the full thing, so I could be very wrong. My view may be absolutely incorrect, but so far, this is what I've gotten. And from what I can tell, the overall story has to do with a discovery of capitalism and how it helped our country flourish, and it caused many other settlers to go across England to the New World and to endeavor in this flourishing type of economy. By the time that the Thanksgiving dinner actually did occur, it was when both natives and Puritans had more food than they could actually eat, and that's when they actually had it. Anti-conformism says, "Hey Garrett, I am late tonight. Better late than never. So welcome to the live chat. I'm not sure how much longer I'm going to have it. It's going on longer than I expected it to, because I'm not sure if you know or not, but I'm not feeling at my best. But so far, I've been able to manage just fine. So unfortunately, we lost a lot of viewers. I think partially because of dead batteries or at least low batteries, and partially because my internet went down slightly. But thankfully, we're getting back up there again. Ford Van Man failed his DNA test, apparently. I don't even want to touch that. I was going to go into a joke, but I'm not going to do it. Let's see here. Maggie says, I was told I was part Native American, and then I took a DNA test. Yeah, I haven't done the DNA test yet. I would imagine that they could probably find all of my native roots, and or if I have any at all. I may vocally it sounds as if I do have some native roots, because I have that slight raspiness to my voice, so the way a lot of natives did, and a lot of natives do that I know have that same type of raspiness to their voice. But I've also got a little bit of a cold, so that'll do it as well. Ford Van says, it's cool, Houseless. I have a sense of humor. Well, I did once, But then I got $1 of a humor. Oh. Yeah. Anyway, that was terrible. So that was pretty much it. That's all I had. There's my content for the evening. I'm not sure if there's anything else anyone else wanted to talk about, but I'm pretty much out. So if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask them. Otherwise, I'll probably plan on getting something to eat here pretty soon. I need to get more vitamin C in my system. I'm feeling okay, but I don't know. I'm also kind of hungry. The interesting thing is this cold is not, removed my appetite, which is nice. So I'll probably make something to eat. Maybe some black beans. Sounds pretty good right now. And welcome back, Janine. And anyone else who may have lost their way during my bad reception, which apparently my live variable resolution stream is bad right now. Nana says, you probably need to rest up, Garrett. Yeah, you're right. And then Greater Bilby says, I should go eat. Maggie says, I am thinking of leftovers right now. The only thing I don't have any leftovers. I don't get anything. I don't have anything like that. Although I did make some pretty amazing steamed carrots and mushrooms, and I drank some what do they call that? Emergency from my vitamin C. And well, since I don't really eat meat, so I mean, on occasion I'll cheat a little bit, but then I regret it afterward because my body's not used to it anymore. But so I stick away from it. Anyway, I think I'm gonna go make something to eat. I am pretty much down for the count as far as content, so I think it's about that time. Plus, my voice is telling me, okay, Garrett, it's time to stop talking, because it's time to stop talking. So anyway, thank you all for joining me on this live stream for Freedom Friday. We'll be probably starting Freedom Friday next week around 6:30, because traffic has just been horrendous. The only reason why I was able to start at 5:30 today was because of the fact I didn't have to work today, because it's the day after Thanksgiving, or Black Friday for a lot of people. I don't necessarily endeavor into that. But anyway, so thank you for all your best wishes, and thank you all for watching. Take care. Love others as you love yourself. And I'll see you next time. Until then, be well, be safe, and be kind. God bless you all.